All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of the REVIVECAST. Today, I got a very special guest on. So this man is kind of the behind the scenes of the Revive and Raw supplementation. He's like one of the smartest guys I've ever met. He specializes in certain areas, which I'll get him to talk about. But I'd like to welcome Will Wallace. How's it going, Will?
Fantastic, Alan.
How you enjoying it down here now that you're with Revive and everybody?
I enjoy it a lot because the company, as most people who follow it know, it's relatively newer. We're not. I don't even think we're at the 2-year limit for the supplement company. Mm-hmm. So it has a little bit of a startup feel to it.
Yeah.
And I've always enjoyed that a lot more because the people involved typically have to wear multiple hats. Mm-hmm. And so you have to kind of make yourself a bit of a factotum of sorts and be good at a lot of different things rather than be pigeonholed into one thing. And I know that some people do well with that. Mm-hmm. And ironically, a lot of PhDs do well with that because you have to specialize in something super specific.
Yeah.
But then you get kind of stuck there.
Yeah.
And for me, going into the office and having to do the exact same thing every day is just maddening. So I enjoy wearing multiple hats and, having my foot in product development and legal and quality assurance and things like that. So I'm enjoying it so far.
So let's get a little bit more background on you. So you went to, where did you go to school?
So for my undergraduate degree, I actually went to a state school in New Hampshire called Keene State. And I didn't really study anything of relevancy to what I do now there. My degree was in occupational safety and health. So that's like OSHA.
Okay.
And I had really only chosen that at the time because it was a degree that allowed me to finish on time because I spent most of my undergrad just kind of like partying and kind of pissing away my education, which of course, playing Monday morning quarterback, I would do differently. But I do think that, obviously when you look back, everything was placed so perfectly that led me to this point, but I actually had to do an extra semester there.
Oh, really?
To finish. Yeah. So I did like a half of a super senior year. But I knew that it wasn't a degree that I wanted anything to do with. I didn't want to work in that field. And I didn't enjoy it and I wasn't passionate about it. And I had always floated towards physiology for some reason. I just thought that the human body was fascinating. It was something that it oddly always stimulated more questions in me when I was hearing things or learning things. It always made me just want to be like, well, why is that?
Yeah.
And then go a little bit deeper. Excuse me. So I took 2 years out of my undergraduate degree and I got prerequisites to go back to school for something that I wanted to do, which at the time I thought might be physical therapy or athletic training or something like that. And I had spent a lot of my tail end of my work in my undergraduate kind of like shadowing the exercise science department, just being like, man, I wish that I could be a part of that. So I applied to a bunch of different schools and I got accepted to most of them for different exercise science degrees for a master's. And I got accepted to the University of Tampa. And that was, at the time, felt like the right one because of the people involved at the time. The person who was running their research lab there was kind of like a rock star in research at the time. So I made the decision to go down to Tampa. And then at the time, I engaged in a lot of different activities. I interned in the strength and conditioning department with athletic training just to see what it is I liked. And if you were there and in the grad program, everybody wanted to be a part of the lab.
Yeah.
Until you get in and you realize that research is very tedious and then not a lot of people can stomach it. But after I went through my master's thesis semester, that was good enough to get me a spot in the lab. And then from there, that just really clicked. I started running research pretty shortly thereafter. And that was a thing ever since. I worked in research from, the tail end of 2015 up until 2018. And a lot of that was dealing with research in like raw ingredients for different sports supplement companies or suppliers that were trying to bring their ingredients to the market for the sports nutrition category. Yeah. So I've been working in product and development for a while, or research and development, but more on the research side of things. And then as soon as I finished my master's, I started my doctorate in health and human performance, where my focus was more nutritional supplementation and neuroscience, which I don't have an official degree in neuroscience. It's actually more of my hobby, but it's where my primary interest lies. So I try to fuse the nutritional supplementation with the neuroscience. Not so much like I don't really take a large part in studying cognitive neuroscience, although I really do enjoy that. Yeah. But more so looking at how different compounds that we take in on a daily basis are exposed to, how those affect the brain. So while I was doing my doctorate, I went to work for a company down in Fort Lauderdale called Life Extension. Yep. So I made a shift from sports nutrition into longevity, and then worked in product development there for about 2.5 years. And then from there, the guys here at Revive had heard of me, got me on the phone. I started doing some contract work for them, and then one thing led to another. Yep. And here we are. And you know, I'm just about wrapping up on my doctorate. I just finished data collection. So I should be done. My deadline is July 1st to finish that. Okay. So not quite doctor status yet, but
you're there.
Almost there. The light's at the end of the tunnel. It's visible at this point.
I mean, if you speak to Will, trust me, he's right there, regardless of what a piece of paper says or anything else. And he's great at the formulation, obviously the new formulas that we're coming out with and everything is, and I always love looking at the different combinations that we have in different products and seeing like the synergy between the two, because obviously that's a big component as well. Is like not that single ingredient, obviously compounds, they work for sure, but it's also if you can get things to work in synergy, you can get a little bit more kind of bang for your buck on what you're trying to accomplish. But the topic, I don't want to say like we're not going to hone in on one specific topic, but what we're going to kind of generally stay around in today's episode is we're going to talk about neurotransmitters. Now, obviously, there's multiple neurotransmitters. The ones that I would say that are most popular or well-known are going to be things like dopamine, GABA, your endorphins, norepinephrine, oxytocin is getting a little bit more play, so to speak, or people are talking about it more. We'll get into a little bit more of what it does. And this ties into obviously health, longevity, as well as performance in the gym. Like you're always making awesome posts on Instagram. I love how you, with the infograms and everything that you're putting up, they're very simplistic and easy to read. And that's one thing I like about you, because you can take a kind of very complex subject and lay it out in more kind of layman's terms, which obviously our audience loves, because you get a lot of people that are PhDs and stuff, and they talk so technical that you literally get more lost the more they talk. It's like, I have no takeaways. I don't understand what you're really trying to say, but to them, obviously that's just their mind turning. But to me, like a great educator, a great teacher is one who can describe these things in simple terms. That shows me that you have even more knowledge than a lot of other people on top of the application as well. Cause I think that's a line that a lot of people don't see, is like, you can have all the knowledge in the world, but then there's application, which to me is a little bit different. All right. And stepping outside that box, because a book or something may say one thing, but then you start applying it to real world people and have different effects than what you thought could happen. Do you see that as well?
Absolutely. I mean, when you talk about the kind of language that people in academia and at the higher levels of academia and higher education, the language that they speak is very specific and technical, and it is its own language. And when you're very enveloped in that world, you realize that the language was developed to be as specific as possible. So what you say is what you mean. And when you repeat that to somebody who doesn't understand the language fully, it's like speaking a language that's foreign to them, although it shares similarities. Yeah. So they can at least, they hear what you're saying, but they may not completely understand it or be able to interpret it. I ran into this a couple of times. Like one good example is, excuse me, I was talking about some of the sex differences between the brain, and like an interesting one appears to be that in some cases the female brain doesn't need as much rest as the male brain. And I used the word rest specifically. And somebody got on me and they're like, "Oh, you can't just say that. Like women don't need less sleep than men." But I'm like, I didn't say sleep. I said rest. So you can't take words and extrapolate different meanings. Like the word means what it means. And the language is so precise that a change in a single word can dictate the meaning of an entire sentence, which affects the next sentence, which can change the way something's interpreted entirely. Yeah. So when you talk to people who are so involved in academia and also, excuse me, have a desire or a need to come across as hyper intelligent, then there's a lot of information that gets lost when you're trying to bring it to application, or where you're trying to communicate with somebody who wants to take away application from it. So there is a large divide. And I don't think a lot of times that's not recognized by general population, and it's not recognized by people on the other side of it who hold some of that information. So it's, you understand when you've been in both worlds, and when you interact with both types of people, your mind starts turning and thinking of ways like, how is this person I'm speaking to going to interpret what I'm saying? Because I know that they're not interpreting it precisely how I mean it. So how do I translate it for them? So it's basically like trying to create a language in between languages. Yes. And if somehow you can master that, then you can provide all the value in the world. And if you can't, then you're just leaving so much that's unheard. And that's what I try to do. I don't always think I do a good job at that, but it's something that I've recognized and seen a lot. And when you're talking about difference between knowledge in a book and practitioners, like, I'm the first to tell you that I've never really been much of a practitioner, right? I've always been more of what do the books say? What do the research say? And then it always fascinates me to look at practitioners like yourself and be like, I wouldn't have seen that information used in the real world in that way. So that's very interesting to somebody like me. Yeah. But when you look at practitioner level, like, it's a whole different ballgame, because something could look perfect on paper, but when you apply it real world, you're like, it's just there's no efficacy. It's not working. It doesn't make sense. And then you just have to play around with it and find what works. So there is a divide in that sense, where a lot of times practitioners may be further ahead than what research is. And research is it's a slow process and kind of has to be at times. So it takes a while to catch up. So people in this world might see what practitioners are doing and be like, well, there's no proof that this works, and be like, well, there's no proof because you just haven't gotten that far. Yeah.
I mean, I get that a lot, obviously. Cause I'm almost like the opposite of you. Like, I was a coach and stuff and coming up, and I knew the basics of physiology and all that good stuff. But at the same time, I started running into issues with getting results for certain clients, and then certain health issues were developing, whether it be amenorrhea, or like constipation, gut issues, whatever it may be. And I'm like, where's the bottleneck? Like, what's causing this? Because looking from a simplistic format, like, they're eating healthy, they're training properly, they're doing all those things correctly, but then we're running into all these issues. Like, so there's connection somewhere. So then that led me to, like, I need to start studying more. I need to start researching more, reading more. And so I started digging into that pathway, and it's led to where I am today, and trying to have that, becoming the practitioner. But we, like you said, we have to kind of think outside the box, because I try to go by the book a lot of times. And in some cases it would solve issues, and then in other cases nothing would happen. I'm like, well, what's going on? Like, it worked for this person and I followed everything to the letter, but then this person, nothing's happening at all. So then now it's like, okay, I can't do this anymore. Obviously it's like the definition of insanity, just doing the same shit over and over and over, and just nothing's happening. So it's kind of defeats the purpose of trying to help somebody and improve them. So I started diving into other directions, and then I started seeing little bits of research that had some correlation to kind of the bottlenecks I was running into. I'm like, well, maybe if I apply such and such to this, and then I try it out, and it is trial and error to an extent, right? I mean, you never know what's going to happen until you try it. And I try a lot of things on myself as well. And then when you start getting results, and you start seeing the observational evidence, even though there's no research behind it, like, that's my proof. It's like, okay, it may not say this in research, but I've got 15, 20 people that have gotten great results and improved via blood work or whatever testing we're doing, and showing that it worked. And at some point, I've had that happen, that research caught up at some point, like, oh, wow, this research now proves what we did. But it's like 5 years after the fact, and I'm seeing that a lot too. And that's the thing, guys, with the research, study it, read it, obviously know how to interpret it first. Like, people just read abstracts and whatnot, and the little blip at the beginning and not actually diving into the research, because that only shows a very small part of what's going on. So you need to understand how to interpret it, but at the same time, keep reading it and stuff, but don't make it the be all end all. Like, you can kind of, okay, take some little things away from that, but don't think it's going to be like a black and white scenario to where you read this research and that's going to work across the board for pretty much everybody.
Yeah. And I think it is important to make clear to people too, that research, and it's funny because you have people like Friedrich Nietzsche who would say things like, to claim that you know anything is considered arrogance to a lot of academics. And he considered that a lot of cases a bad thing. At the same time, using the word like research has proven is like, it's kind of frowned upon to say the word proven. Depending on what you're looking at, research shows or demonstrates things in certain scenarios, but it's very rare that research proves something, right? I mean, of course, like that is the case at times, but when you're reading research and interpreting it, it's important to look at a given research article or a string of articles that are attached or a topic within a certain condition, that things are demonstrated by condition and within context. So you can't just read a bunch of research and be like, I have proven what's optimal. You're like, I always like to say that what's optimal does not exist outside of context.
True.
And the context sometimes can be so specific that unless you're doing your diligence and understanding the inner workings of things and peeling back the layers, then you may not be able to elucidate the entire context of something. And then at the same time, you get into the problems where, you know, sometimes just reading research doesn't cut it, because, I mean, granted, like for people, anybody who reads research and doesn't have the training and knowing how to do so, like right on, you know, cause like that's not easy.
Yeah. At
the same time, like I think it's important to like find either mentors or tools that help you translate it appropriately. Yes. Cause you can look at things and be like, whoa, that was a significant finding. But then you look at it and be like, well, like clinically, was it relevant? Like if we're talking about dietary ingredients specifically, like we just got done making a men's health product that'll be coming out soon for Revive. For the other company, Raw, a test boosting product comes out, excuse me, pretty soon. And when we're putting the ingredients together to decide what goes into those, you know, in some cases we're looking at, you know, male hormones and studies that showed testosterone boosting effects of some herbs or vitamins. And you look at some of them and like, oh, significant boost in testosterone, but you look at the boost between time periods and compared to other groups, and you're like, well, is that boost clinically, does that mean anything? So even just like reading research itself might not give you a lot of meaning. You actually have to look at the data, know how to interpret it. And then sometimes the toughest part of all is maybe even knowing statistics and why certain statistical models were used over others, because you may catch something like, oh, we use this statistical model and we found nothing. So then we use this statistical model and then all of a sudden we found something. It's like, if you know the difference between the two models, be like, you really had to go out of your way to find something. Oh, you know, and if somebody just read it on its face, they wouldn't be able to catch things like that. But if you haven't gone to school and are like training those things, I don't think it's always necessary. But a lot of times the best thing you can do is find somebody who knows better than you, who can show you how to sift through information and determine what's reliable versus unreliable.
Yeah. I mean, we see research a lot. And like one topic when we're talking about that is like what demographics are used or what control groups are used within that. So you'll get the argument that we get in our field about like calories in, calories out. It's like literally that simple to lose body fat, lose weight, get in shape, blah, blah, blah. And they say that it works, like there should be no issues with it. Like it should just simply work. And then you look at who's being used in the study, and it's 25-year-old males who obviously with the hormone profile, and then they're taking that. And then we're dealing with a lot of females whose physiology is completely different, especially with the hormones. And they're 40 years old and maybe menopause or whatever. And people are trying to apply stuff like that, like a 25-year-old study, because it worked with them. Well, it should work across the board. And they think that's the way it works. Like that's the whole calories in, calories out crowd. That's just kind of in this box, and they think it's a black and white situation. to apply to everybody. And obviously we've seen that 10 times over. That's just not the case. Yes, calories in, calories out work in the perfect scenario with everything being healthy and copacetic and no issues going on from a hormonal standpoint. But when you start throwing other things into the picture, it changes the context of the study that was applied, right? And you can't just use that. And that's what they're using even with skewing statistics with like health markers, like blood pressure or like what the range is for diabetes now. Because our population is getting more unhealthy, it skews that line more. Well, the majority of the population is here. So this is what our new standard is, right? And they keep shifting it up to the unhealthy standard. Like before it was like 120 over 80. Now it's 130 over 85. It's like, you're going to keep creeping that up just because our population is getting more unhealthy.
Just because the mean tends to be creeping up. So it's like, well, I guess this is what the mean is supposed to be. But
it's like now what we know, what we did know as being unhealthy is now being perceived as healthy because that shifts with the population and because it's getting more unhealthy. And obviously for me as a practitioner, like, well, common sense, keep it one place and let everybody work towards that, healthy marker instead of keep shifting those markers. And now we're literally pushing people to be unhealthy. Oh, I'm 130 over 90. I'm fine. No big deal. And then 5 years from now, it's going to be 135 over whatever. And it just keeps going in the wrong direction. And that's going to make our society more unhealthy as a whole. Right. And obviously in our industry, this is what we're trying to prevent and kind of shift the other direction. But again, people will read the research and stuff on that and be like, okay, well, this is what it says it's supposed to be in medical literature. Does that mean that that's optimal for any one person?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think that when and again, it all depends on what exactly is the research looking at. When we look at something like, kind of going to what you said initially, calories in, calories out, I always think this one's really funny. And I always get like a nice little laugh when I hear people like arguing it, because I think that I've been fortunate that I have been heavily involved in the exercise sciences and sports nutrition. And then I made a transition into longevity where I had a lot of wonderful mentors in the fields of neuroscience, biochemistry, nutrition, and people that were more focused on like cellular health and general longevity in people. And because of that, you get exposed to ideas and information that somebody on the other side of the fence, they just don't, especially if they stick in this ballpark.
Yeah.
And it's funny because, you can list off a bunch of people in your head who are probably obvious ones who are like, no, calories in, calories out. And they're very like,
that's it.
And that's it. And then you have people on the other side of the fence who they tend to shift towards the health focus. Like I'm more focused on health, and they go, well, no, like different foods, those affect cells differently. And that changes calories in, calories out, and, hormones. It's about hormones. It's about this. And these people are like, no, it's about this. And it's like, I find it comical because I'm like, you guys are both talking about different things. Now, the calories in, calories out people, I know that what they really mean is that it's basically governed by the law of thermodynamics. But on the other hand, when people are talking about how nutrition affects genes and how it affects cellular health and just the cellular underpinnings of health, be like, well, yeah, I mean, certainly nutrition affects thermodynamics within a given person, because if it affects the way that genes are being transcribed, that the way that different proteins are being active, affecting hormones, then within a person, cellular thermodynamics change a little bit.
Yeah.
And so it's like both people are looking at the same three-dimensional piece of art, but one of them's looking at it from the front and the other one's looking at it from the back, and they're trying to explain what they're looking at. Yep. It's like you guys are looking at the same general piece of art, but you're looking at it from different angles. And if everybody had the same exposure to the same amount and type of information, then everybody might understand each other a little bit better. And so when it comes down to it, it's like they're arguing, and they think they're arguing about the same thing. But they're not.
Yes.
It's actually two slightly different things. I'm like, nobody. And so now the people that listen to that and look at those sources of information as their truth, because like I mean, granted, like a lot of the people that are listening to this, they're getting a lot of their health information, excuse me, from mediums like this one, through podcasts,
Yep.
through social media.
Yep.
And so they look to people who they trust, and people like us who try to promote information. We create our own echo chambers.
Yeah.
So people that come in and follow us and follow us for the long haul, they tend to be of similar mind and attitude and agree with a lot of the things we say. And then they trust us. And then when we say something, they believe it. And then when they see something that comes in to the contrary, even if there's truth to it, it may not give them a large enough prediction error to change their knowledge schema that they have now formed on something. Yeah. And so with the information we put out, we attract certain type of people. With the people that we follow, we take in certain types of information, and we just create echo chambers for ourselves. And excuse me. So it becomes increasingly difficult for the general population who are looking to people like us for information to decide what's reliable versus unreliable. Firstly, like their ability to comprehend the information is one thing, but then they also need a good way of determining what's true versus what's not. And even in the people they don't agree with, like what are they saying that does bear truth to it within a given context? So so it's difficult. I try to expose myself to a lot of people I disagree with. Yeah. Even though I'll find myself like unfollowing people on social media. They'll say something, I can't take this guy anymore. And then I'll find myself re-following him a couple months later. Cause I'm like, I can't. I'm curious because I want to know, like, present me an idea that's challenging and I'll at least pay attention to it. Mm-hmm. Even if I don't agree with it, I'm like, I should look into this, because what if I have only exposed myself to the information that I agree with? Yeah. And if I've done that, then I'm limiting myself. And therefore the information that I am putting out is limiting the viewpoints of other people. That's
a great way to put that. Because I think we've all been there. I mean, because I'm like you, there's some people like, I just can't listen to him anymore. I can't read this anymore. And I just delete him, unfollow him or whatever. But like one takeaway is like, there's no absolute, like there's not, he's right, he's wrong type deal. There's a little bit of truth in everything for the most part that someone's saying. So yeah, I may disagree with like a majority of what someone says, but I can still find truth in what they're saying to an extent. And if I put it in context within a given situation. But I think the problem is when you have the two extremes, like it's just like the calories in, calories out, or just the hormonal people or whatever, they're not creating the synergy between the two. It's like, look at all affects one another. It all works in conjunction with each other. There's all correlation between the two systems. It's not one or the other. It's everything integrated into one, right? Like sometimes the hormones are causing the issues, and sometimes it is deficit for too long causing the hormonal issues. It's like, is it the chicken or the egg? Like which caused what? It doesn't really matter. They're all working together basically for your body to try to create homeostasis and balance within the system, depending on what you're trying to achieve. And I want people to challenge me. Like, if you can prove me wrong, have at it. Like I've changed my mind. I don't know how many times over the last, 2 to 3 decades of doing this. And I think that's a indicator of a good coach or a good practitioner is the evolution of your thought process and learning different ideas from different people, obviously digging into it a little bit more. Don't just take what they say as it's written in stone and that's just the way it is, because things do evolve over time. We figure out more things, we get into more research and whatnot. Because I try to teach my coaches that are coming under me now is like, think outside the box, because they do this in the bodybuilding world, the physique world. Like they literally freak out because like some people, I'll take their protein from 250 to 50 grams. Like, holy shit, what are you doing? 50 grams. Like, I thought our goal was to build muscle tissue and lose fat, blah, blah, blah. Well, let's put context to why I'm actually doing this, to correct, hormonal imbalances or protein adaptation or whatever it may be. And if you give them some context and teach them, they're like, okay, now I'm starting to understand why you're doing this. But if you put that in the physique world and just say you're eating 50 grams of protein a day, they're like, that's just wrong. Mm-hmm. Like, you're wrong. I don't care. It's a black and white situation. You need amino acids, blah, 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 to build muscle tissue. Yeah. Yes, you're correct. But again, let's put it in context of what this person is dealing with in their situation. And then, yes, at some point I will bring their protein back up for certain goals, but not stepping outside of the box. And always, you're going to get it right with some people some of the time, but nothing works forever. You know, something works until it doesn't work, but people get stuck in their ways and don't try to look at other ways to improve supplementation or whatever. And then they're just lost. Mm-hmm. And then they get those, you know, the demographic, like it's going to work for like a percentage of their clients, and the other percentage, they're just left in the dark. Like, what do I do with these people?
Yeah. I think a good way to look at it, or like a good, something that's good for people to think about, whether they're a practitioner, this is just like a good life principles that govern one point of life do not necessarily govern another. And that works if you're a bodybuilder, that works if you're a researcher, that holds true from when you're a teenager all the way up until you're a grown adult. Mm-hmm. And it certainly holds true for when you're working with clients, things that you implement for one end goal, they won't necessarily and oftentimes be conducive for another goal at another stage. And that is funny because you do see a lot of in like sports nutrition, mm-hmm. especially if you look at the research and that, you hear like, you know, all the different requirements that are thrown out for protein, you know, 1 gram per pound of body weight, or if you're trying to build muscle, you know, 1.7 grams per kg. And if you're an elderly person trying to stave off sarcopenia, then there's different requirements. But you go over again, you jump into the longevity field, and then you have some people that are deathly afraid of eating that much protein for fear of stimulating their mTOR into a state of disease, you know? And so it is really funny. And I know that I don't think that so far we haven't really talked about, I think, a whole lot of like practical applications for people, but I think that at least to this point, we have touched on a lot of ideas to get people's heads turning, because ultimately we can spoon feed them a lot of cool, specific information, but if they can't think through it on their own and generate their own ideas for it, then the information that we give them now might not necessarily be applicable to another stage of life.
Yeah. I mean, and that's a good thing, guys, is like with the podcast, like we want to open your minds up. It's not like always just do what we say because we said to do it, or like this is what we perceive to be the best route. Yes, we have our own thought process, and I'll give you context for why I say something and the application of it. But like the first half of this podcast, like just open your eyes up to not thinking there's any absolute or there's not a black and white to anything. Dig a little deeper, look at it from different angles, and not like Will was putting it, looking at a picture. You want to look at it from, you know, the entirety of the picture, not just from one angle of it.